How are we supposed to understand the great myths, stories, symbols, and imagery of American art, culture, and literature? Myth and symbol criticism is a school of literary interpretation that analyzes the prevailing archetypes, motifs, imagery, and symbolism which move stories forward to their inevitable conclusion. In understanding the great artistic creativity of American drama, there are a number of images and symbols which help to propel these stories forward. Those include the archetype, the image of the American atom, the symbol of the garden, and the symbol of the machine coming into the garden to destroy it. Two great scholars of the mid-20th century explain this in the best ways possible. R.W.B. Lewis in The American Atom, and Leo Marx in his great book, The Machine and the Garden. In The American Atom, R.W.B. Lewis, who was a professor of American Studies and Literature at Yale in the mid-20th century, analyzes the early American canon, including such famous writers like Melville, Hawthorne, and Cooper, and he extended it even into the early 20th century with the likes of F. Scott Fitzgerald. Lewis's contention, which I largely agree with and have been influenced by myself, asserts that early American literature, from Crevecoeur's Letters from an American Farmer to Melville's Moby Dick, plays on the archetypal symbol of the American man as the new atom, which would then become the American atom. The new atom, in essence, was what Crevecoeur described as the man liberated from the past, the man liberated from heritage, the man liberated from history, the man liberated from the old world and sin, so to speak, in order to make himself newly innocent, independent, and adventurous. To the American atom, the world was his for the taking. His identity could be entirely self-created. His life lay before him. It was a life open to anyone and everyone who just had the ability, the daring, to create that new life. Some writers enthusiastically endorsed this story of the new Adam as a hero, not bound by the burdens of the past or sin, or whatever other concept you wish to insert as bearing down on the individual. Others critiqued this story of the American Atom and showed the idea to be ultimately tragic and fantastical, say like Nathaniel Hawthorne. And yet others more blend the innocent and heroic Adam with the tragic reality of existence, wherein the innocent Adam becomes a sage of wisdom over the complexities of life by the end of his story, as Melville does with Ishmael in Moby Dick. You also have the eventual inversion and the promotion of a new Adam, a character, a hero, who has been so distraught and destroyed by struggles that he sets out into the new world to become unburdened by that past and seek a new life. This, of course, is one of the great motifs, the great stories that undergird so much of the American Western. Lewis's work is a great introductory summary and analysis of the classics of American literature and culture that simultaneously preserve a sense of awe and wonder, the sense of awe and wonder we should have toward our artistic, cultural, and literary patrimony, while also deepening our understanding of the story within the story, the symbols within the symbols, and how the story of the American Atom truly is foundational to so much of the American mythic psyche. So unlike modern-day criticism, which is poisoned by the usual suspects of the political correct story running amok, Lewis's book returns us to those fundamental themes, messages, the inner reality of symbology that abounded in early American consciousness and found itself in our greatest literature. In many ways, as Lewis points out, we, even though we live in the 21st century, are still haunted by the prospect and the downfall of the American Adam, which is somewhat ironic given that the American Adam was supposed to be free of burdens, and yet we are burdened by the idea of the American Adam. You can look at, for instance, the American dream that so many of us are told we must pursue as being a continuation of the new Adam myth. For who is the American dream open to? The man, the woman, the son, the daughter, who in becoming the new American, in embracing the new life open to him, charts out a new path to better himself, to create a new identity and a new life. And this, of course, goes all the way back, Lewis is saying, to the very foundation of American literature, both in a positive and a negative understanding of what the new man, the new Adam, is all about. The American Adam is the idea that the individual can be freed from all the burdens of the past, that the new Adam can create a new life for himself in this new world that is open to his entire fiber, being, and heart. In sum, the American Adam's myth and symbol critique amounts to this. America is the land of opportunity, where an individual can free themselves from all those burdens that weigh down on him, and thereby create a new life. And yet within this story, we see the failure of the American Adam. We see the hope and the optimism of the American Adam. We see the healing of the American Adam. And all the different characters of American art, culture, and literature usually embody these different aspects and flashes of who the American Adam is. You have often the farmer, the soldier, the sailor, the preacher, the cowboy, for instance. The cowboy is one of the greatest images of this dream of the American Adam. The man going out into the boundless open reality of the American West to chart a new life for himself, maybe also for his family. We also have the Western dealing with the tragedy, usually the tragedy of the Civil War, where the American character, the American hero, is so distraught and burdened by the suffering and the horror and the tragedy that he experienced in the American Civil War that he moves out west to find a new life in the prairies. Thus, we have, of course, the ideas of the innocent Adam. We also have the heroic Adam. And yet, according to Lewis, the Adam that ended up dominating the story of the American Adam is the tragic Adam. Think of how many of the great characters in American literature, in American film, have that tragic element to them. They come from a world of tragedy, seeking a new life, only to find that their new life is still tragic. Or in the case of Melville's Ishmael, the most famous case study of the innocent and heroic Adam falling into tragedy over the course of the story. What Lewis is presenting to us is a study of the individual protagonist and what the individual protagonist really embodies and represents, and how through their individual story, we are receiving an even greater story about the idea of American hope and optimism, and how, despite that hope and optimism, we cannot quite escape the darkness and the horror of death, destruction, and tragedy. And so it is that many of the great American Adam figures in American culture, American literature, and even American film end up as that tragic character who is scarred, marred, or even dies, like Gatsby, at the end of the story. You also have another great image that carries the American mythology forward, and that is the image, the symbol of the garden, the American Eden. Yet this image is usually juxtaposed with another, the image of the machine or technology coming into the garden, bringing death and destruction in its path. Leo Marx was one of the last great myth and symbol critics in American culture and literature. In his book, The Machine in the Garden, he analyzes this tension between the Edenic paradise, which is offering the American Adam figure the new life that he so desperately longs for, and how, in finding that new life, in pursuing that, he is haunted by the specter of the machine coming into the garden, which will destroy everything that he hopes for. And this, of course, the machine can be represented by the railroad, the urban metropolis, the factory, science, the mass reality of mobilized armies and war, etc., etc. The core idea, though, here, according to Marx, is the machine symbol, whatever that symbol might be in a particular story, brings poison and corruption to the virgin land of nature. Thus, we have the beginning of a quintessential dialectic that even informs the rhetoric of American politics. The noble and honorable little man, the farmer, the pioneer, out in nature, the true America, standing against the evil capitalist, the railroad baron, the land speculator, who is bringing the onslaught of civilizational technology into this virgin land, which will destroy the life of the farmer, the life of the pioneer, the life of the cowboy, etc. Anyone who has watched, for instance, some of Kevin Costner's great films, most famously of all Dances with Wolves, will even notice how the machine and the garden myth and symbol influence that story. Kevin Costner's Lieutenant Dunbar is the nature man, according to Marx, who wants to return to the simplicity and wholesomeness of the natural way of life, represented by the Sioux, while being threatened by the forces of scientific and technological civilization and progress, the white settlers, the hunters, the American soldiers, so on and so forth. It plays with this trope, this great theme and dialectic of the machine coming into the garden world to destroy the last vestiges of goodness and wholesomeness and healing hope. You also find this, of course, in Yellowstone. You find this, too, even in Waterworld. The pastoral ideal in America versus the dream of the machine leads Marx to question, what is the real American dream? Is it the journey out into nature? Is it the modern pioneer reality, which would be sort of like the American road trip as the modern continuation of that cowboy and pioneer spirit of venturing out into the wild and into the wilderness? Leo Marx is asking us that if the pastoral ideal is so integral to the American psyche, then why is it that it completely depends on the contrast, the emergence of the machine in the garden? And thus, isn't it also the case that the rise of technology and science and the city and civilization and capitalism and wealth is also part of the American dream? Even in the early days of the American Republic, major cities were the dominant forces of politics, Boston and New York. Urban men led the revolution. Urban men fueled manifest destiny and the linking of the continent between the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. And yet, despite that, the allure of the pastoral ideal remains strong, even in the 20th and the 21st century. We have a tendency to sympathize and to empathize with the little guy, the farmer, or the rural patriot. We have a tendency to be suspicious of those men in suits, those men from the cities and their big business attitudes and their urban way of life. Yet, the story of the American garden, the story of the American Adam venturing out into the American wilderness and the American Eden to escape the horror and the onslaught of technological civilization depends. It completely depends on that contrast, the scary, the dark, technological, scientific, urban villain. Leo Marx, however, thinks that this hyper-romanticization of the pastoral ideal is ultimately a dead end for culture and politics, for it refuses to come to grips with the reality that we are no longer a pastoral and rural society, that we have become what we most feared, an urban, industrial, scientific, technological, capitalist, tyrannical society. What are then we to do? The artist, according to Marx, points his finger on a problem and brings it to life for us. Thus we see even in F. Scott Fitzgerald, the great author, highlighting the materialist excesses of the Roaring Twenties and the emptiness of life in his work, yet retreating back into the old America, the rural America, Midwestern America. The artist can only highlight the problems that our society faces. The artist, however, is incapable of actually offering us the solution to that problem. Marx combines a great analysis of culture, of artistry, literature, and politics in his great study of the machine in the garden. And his work, of course, rivals Lewis's The American Adam. But they should not be seen as competitive analyses, competitive books, but as complements to each other. For in The Machine in the Garden, Leo Marx draws out for us how American culture has been divided between this naturalistic romanticism and simplicity on one hand, over and against industrial progress, urbanism, science, technology, and tyranny on the other. But it also highlights for us how we can better understand that concept, that image of the American Adam within this dynamic tension between his heart's desire for living a new, simple, healing life out in the wild, out in nature, in the American Eden, in the garden that offers new life and boundless potential, while also having to fight against and to be constantly burdened by the specter of the coming of the machine, of technology, of progress, of capitalism, of civilization, which would destroy the garden world he seeks to find refuge in. We see this, of course, as already mentioned, in so many American films, especially the Western, where that dichotomy and dynamism and dialectic of naturalistic simplicity versus technological destruction is usually apparent for us, or at least always looming in the background. Yet, this is also the great dialectical theme of so much science fiction filmography. Let's look at James Cameron, for instance, who is in fact the great machine and garden filmmaker of the modern world. Take Terminator as one of the quintessential examples of this. The bad guys are the machines, the Terminators. You also have an evil, bad corporation, Skynet, technological horror and annihilation in the form of AI. You also have the story of corporate greed bound up within the image of the machine, of Skynet, of AI committing genocide. You can also look at Cameron's spectacular film Avatar. Pandora is the garden, the RDA, the scientific machine of conquest coming in to destroy the garden. You have Jake Sully as the archetypal American Adam, the man who seeks to be reborn in the world of the garden, finding the new Eve in this conflict and struggle, this desire for hope and healing amid a world of technological death and destruction. And now you could go back and look at a lot of science fiction films over the last 40 years, from the 1980s to today, and you see this story, this myth and symbol all over the place. So many science fiction films are actually continuing. They are the new medium by which the American Adam, the American Eden, the garden world, and the machine coming in to destroy the garden world are playing themselves out. Leo Marx's book is a great introduction to the pastoral ideal in Western literature and how it really comes to fruition in the American imaginary psyche. It is the great work that helps us understand the fullness of the context of the American Adam, as well as the grand imagery and symbolism that dominates so much American literature and cultural storytelling. In order to understand the prominent myths, symbols, and imagery of American art, culture, literature, and now even film, we should always be looking at that concept of the American Adam, or now in the 21st century, the American Eve, the heroic individual who is standing against the horror and the tyranny, the death and destruction of the machine, whatever manner the machine takes its form, and how in confronting the machine, that hero is usually on the side of the garden, defending the world of nature against the sterile tyranny and destructive appetite of science, of technology, of corporatism, of capitalism, of the machine coming into this garden world, bringing its death, its corruption, and its poison. Whether it is the American Western, whether it is the American war film, whether it is the American sci-fi, once we have an understanding that so much of our cultural mystique and mythos and storytelling play upon these great images and symbols, once we understand that, we truly do gain a deeper insight and appreciation into the profundity of their stories. And lastly, looking back on R.W.B. Lewis and Leo Marx, we might just find the traces and the echoes of Adam and Eve in the modern world.